Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Siebersod coming to you from the campus of Binghamton University. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Putting Your Resume to Work. This is part of the Binghamton Learning Network webinar series, which in itself is part of one of the many lifelong learning offerings that we have here at Binghamton University through your Alumni Association. So we have this webinar series, the Tier Talk speaker event series, an alumni travel program, an alumni virtual book club that you can take part in anywhere in the world. So after the show, check us out. I'll put our website here on the screen, binghamton.edu/advancement/connect, binghamton.edu/advancement/connect, or a shorthand way to get you there with maybe one or two clicks to get you to the exact page, binghamton.edu/alumni. Used to be our URL, forwards to the new site, binghamton.edu/alumni. We have a brand new Advancing Binghamton website that we just launched within the last couple of weeks. So it's a better way to serve you if you would like to deepen your connection with us here at the university, something that we always welcome. So before we go on to introduce the speaker for today's program, just want to go over some housekeeping notes. We want this program to be interactive and fueled by your questions. And so definitely send us your questions and start thinking about them. And if you want to send them now, that's cool with us. I'll go ahead and put our address here on the screen. You can email me at sseepers@binghamton.edu, sseepers@binghamton.edu. You can send me your questions, and we will mix these in during the program. If you're watching on Facebook, just add your question as a comment, and we will see it there. If you had registered in advance for this webinar, you get a custom viewing link to the ALC microsite. Go ahead and send your questions in the comment box there. We get all of those, and we'll be monitoring these questions throughout the show, and we will mix these in where it makes sense, plus allow about the last 10 minutes or so for questions. So we will go ahead and get that going in just a couple of minutes. And as part of the registration for the webinar, if you had signed up in advance, you may remember that we had a couple of extra questions in addition to what we normally ask when you sign up for an event. So it's meant to get a sense if you're actively looking for a job and what field you are interested in, things like that. But also it had a space to add in some questions. And so I went ahead and printed these out, and we can add some of these questions in where it makes sense. So if you sent in a question, we have it. If you want to send it again, that's great. But these will get mixed in throughout the course of the show over the next hour. And it's not a hard stop at one necessarily. If we get good questions and some good answers that are coming as a result, we'll go on a little bit on past, probably to about 1:10 at the latest. So the earlier with your questions, if you really want to get them in, earlier is better as far as sending those in. And so without further ado, let's introduce Andrew Willner. Andy Willner, our featured speaker for today, coming to us from Massachusetts, where he's the co-founder of CAEDENCE Consulting. And he can tell you a lot more about what he does and what that's all about. And we had him on as part of our webinar series a couple of years ago. And I believe the program was Take Control of Your Time, if I remember correctly, and looking at how to make the most of a finite resource. The amount of time that we have during the workday to get things done is not infinite. So that was a great program. And so for those who are in the market or anticipate going into the market early in 2026, we don't normally program a webinar here in December, but it's very important, Andy and I, that we get that done because we know it will be helpful to a lot of people. And so take a little bit of a break during the holidays, enjoy time with family and friends, and then start to crank up the job search early in 2026. And that's what today's program is meant to be all about. So that's a very long introduction to Andy. I'll stop there. Thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you here this afternoon.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here, and welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk about putting your resume to work. First, I'm going to introduce myself, and Steve mentioned the questions that people answered during registration, so I will introduce the audience a little bit briefly. And we're going to talk about what most job seekers don't understand about resumes, the mistakes that people make in creating resumes that hurt their chances of getting the interview and getting the job they want, and what you can do to avoid those pitfalls. And we're going to do this in the form of the journey that the resume takes from when you create it through the process of the various screenings and what the company's going to be doing with it and looking for. As Steve said, my name is Andy Willner. I am a Binghamton graduate. I am currently a co-founder and managing director at CAEDENCE Consulting. We help our clients overcome various business and technical obstacles and hurdles that they face. We do leadership coaching, and we do professional skills development and mentoring. When I'm not at work, I like to go play outside in summer and winter, hiking and biking especially. Background, as I said, I graduated from Binghamton, from Harper College, with a degree in physics a very long time ago. And as well, got some degrees elsewhere. Worked for several large companies before founding CAEDENCE. I enjoy doing these kinds of career skills talks, and I've done them at a number of universities and professional societies around the Northeast in the past year or so. I also like helping the students. I'm involved with Binghamton's Mentor Match, as well as Cornell's equivalent CUE links. If you're not on that platform, I encourage you to do it either as a mentor or as a protege. You can meet some really interesting and helpful people there. And what you're probably most interested in, I've reviewed hundreds of resumes and interviewed hundreds of people, both as a hiring manager and as a coach over the years. Really excited, 90 people registered for today's talk. And here's the breakdown: about 2/3 alumni and 1/3 students and one unaffiliated guest, with class years spanning nearly 50 years, from 1981 to class of 28, and covering some 39 different majors. So we've got quite a wide variety of backgrounds coming to the table today. And I think you'll find that the principles that we're going to talk about apply regardless of what you studied, what kind of job you're looking for, or what industry you're looking to get into. Among the pre-registrants, more than 2/3 said they were currently looking for a job. Of course, that makes sense given the topic today. And again, big diversity of interests, wide variety of roles people were looking to get into in an equally wide variety of different industries. And perhaps most importantly, 80% of those pre-registrant, or of you all pre-registrants, found that they're finding the job search process frustrating. And that's perfectly understandable. And I hope we can give you some tools today to help reduce that frustration. So the outline for the talk, as I mentioned, is the resume's journey. So you're going to submit a resume. What happens to it? The first thing is it goes through some kind of software or AI screening, typically. Not always, but often. And if that rejects your resume, you're on the exit ramp and you're back to searching. If you get the green light from the software, you're going to get to a human resources recruiter screening. And of course, the same thing happens there. If they don't like what they see, you're back to searching. If you get the go-ahead, you're going to move on to the hiring manager. The hiring manager does their screening. Again, you can be kicked out or you can continue. And once you've passed the minimum level for the hiring manager, the next mission for your resume is to make sure you're differentiated, that you stand out from the other applicants. And we'll talk in some detail later about how to do that. Again, fail that hurdle, you're back to searching, get the go-ahead. Your resume has a final, and I think the most interesting part of the journey. It can influence the interviewer. It can help you control the kinds of questions that you get asked on the interview. So we'll talk in some detail about how that works. And obviously you got to pass the interview in order to get to the new job. So we'll be following this roadmap throughout. So let's start with that first level, passing the software screening. Many companies have used software tools to screen resumes for many years now. AI, of course, has made this easier for them, and it's made it more widespread. You'll hear the acronym ATS, or for Applicant Tracking System. This is the generic name for the software that a lot of companies are using. And they're searching for keywords. To pass this screening, you have to make sure those keywords can be found on your resume. And not just that your keywords are on your resume, but that they can be found on your resume. So I'll talk about both of these points. You want to format your resume to be friendly for these softwares. And that means keeping it simple. Use Word documents rather than PDFs. Some ATSs are incompatible or have trouble reading PDFs. Avoid putting critical information in headers or footers that sometimes get ignored by the software. Keep the layout simple, single column, simple font. Avoid fancy symbols and graphics. And use standard language, standard section headers, experience, education. Don't get fancy. Where there are relevant acronyms for your field, use both the long and the short form. So, for instance, SEO, and also write out search engine optimization. So the idea here, I think, is fairly straightforward. These, as sophisticated as these softwares are, they do get tripped up by certain elements of formatting. So you want to make sure that you maximize your chances of your keywords being found by not causing those issues and keeping it simple for the software to read. So then the keywords themselves, what do I mean by that? Well, job postings are full of relevant keywords. So what you need to do then is review the job posting that you're very interested in, as well as other relevant job postings in the industry, in similar roles. And you're looking for those keywords that show up repeatedly. So here's a posting from Binghamton. And if you look through this, you'll see keywords covering things like a specific field. Here, they're looking for someone with a background in STEM and public administration. Specific software, in this case, Airtable. Specific skills and certifications, and here it's a PMP certificate. Specific industry experience, clean energy, startup, and so on. You want to make sure those words appear on your resume. And they don't have to be as a simple list. They can be within your bullet points of your experience. They can be on a list of skills and qualifications, or they could be in your objective statement at the top. But they do need to appear because that's the key to get through the first screening by the AI software. The next step in the journey is the HR recruiter, and they are screening, but in a slightly different way. To pass the HR recruiter screening, you need to understand what they're looking for. They're looking for general resume features. It's unlikely that the HR recruiter is going to be a specialist in your field. And nowadays, it could even also be an AI. What they need to see at this level, once you've passed the initial screening, the HR screener is looking in your resume for good appearance, it's clear, there aren't any errors or typos. There's evidence of your communication, your teamwork, and your leadership skills. And ideally, evidence of career progression, that your responsibilities have increased over time. You should also keep the style of the resume appropriate to the role. So if you're going into, if you're applying for a management position, a business position, engineering position, you want to keep it fairly formal and conservative style. If you're going for an artistic role, a graphic design role, you can be more flexible and show more creativity. Again, being careful that the AI screener won't get tripped up. And then you want to keep the length of your resume in line with the accepted convention. For most people, that's 1 page. If you have more than 20 years experience, 2 pages can be okay. If you have a PhD, you might want to add an additional page for your publications. And I see people violate this all the time. I see people with a lot of experience putting details going back to jobs they had in high school when they've been a professional for 30 years, taking up 3 and 4 pages. Screeners just don't read that stuff. They just take it as a sign that this person is not able to communicate concisely, and they go on to the next resume. So it's a little bit arbitrary, but 1 page is really the expectation from employers.
Andy, I'll jump in with a question, but before
Please.
I get into that, and I'll just go ahead and put the slides aside for a couple seconds. We'll take a little bit more of the screen, and I'll bring the slide deck back up once I disappear. I was going through the list of questions that came in before the webinar. These are the ones that came from the people who registered, and so there are a few things that related to AI screeners, and so one of my questions will be related to that. And then also about the length, which you had covered. And so somebody had asked if a 1-page resume would be sufficient. For some things, yes. Other things, no. Depends on if it's something like higher education. The more that you have, especially a professor's CV, the longer that is with more publications, conference presentations, things of that sort, the longer the better. If it's something like in the more of a business realm, let's get to the meat of it. Let's keep all the high school jobs off that don't belong. 1 page, because time is precious, and the screener, whether it's AI or a person, is not going to spend a lot of time. So going back to the whole thing about the AI screening or even the human screening, I think this question probably would apply to either scenario. A lot of people like use ChatGPT now for various things. And so is it worthwhile to use ChatGPT to kind of feed up some content about yourself and about the job posting and say, here's what I'm applying for, here's my background, this language comes from the job posting, and see what ChatGPT comes back and spits out as far as bullet points for the resume? So if you do that, does that give you a higher chance of trying to get past the AI screener? Because hopefully AI knows what AI is looking for. And so that becomes sort of the theory on that. Or if it's a human that's looking at it and it's generated by AI, is that a negative? Because we're all pretty good at spotting that's done by ChatGPT. That's not the human hand at work in writing that.
Yeah, so a couple questions there. We'll take the first one first. Yeah, a CV is different from a resume. So I agree completely. This talk is about resume, more oriented toward the business side of the world. A CV is really related, of course, but a different kind of document in some of the ways you described. As far as using AI to help you craft your resume, I would look at it that way, to help you. So it's not to do it for you. I think it's perfectly useful, especially if you're starting from scratch, or even if you have a draft already, to use AI to create sort of a starting point to help polish. But in the end, it has to be the person describing themselves, in my opinion. I think the advent of AI means there's no such thing as writer's block anymore. You can have it spit out an outline or a paragraph or two for you. I find when I do that, I always end up rewriting just about every element of that, whether that's for posting an email or a resume or a presentation. So I think it helps overcome some of the inertia or roadblocks that people have in getting started, but I certainly would not rely on it for the finished product.
And it's great that you mentioned the scenario of getting started. And so that was coming through from a couple of the questions and the comments that were sent in from people who had registered. Things along the lines of, it's been about 20 to 25 years since I've had to do this or since I've wanted to do it. And they are a little bit stuck with getting started, or they want to refresh on what they're doing and are looking to generate some ideas around that.
Yep. Okay. Good. So let's try some examples here, just to kind of frame what I was talking about. So here's an example of a traditional conservative format. And as I said, this is recommended for most business and technical positions. Again, CVs being a separate animal. stick with one font. And this is an example of adjusted for an anonymity, but someone I helped with their resume, and they were getting very creative with every level being in a different font, and it just distracts. Bold colors, unconventional layouts, they can be appropriate for creative positions, but you don't want to go overboard. You want to avoid column formatting. It can be interesting for a person, but getting back to the AI screener, it can be difficult for automated software to interpret. And what can happen is it can latch onto one column, ignore the other one, miss all your keywords, and you get rejected before you even start. So you definitely, no matter how nice you may think it looks, it's not best practice to have multiple columns on a resume these days. Photos, you see sometimes, photos are not expected on a resume, at least in the US. In some countries, like for instance in Germany, they're pretty common. However, I did want to mention them because they are expected on your LinkedIn profile. And that's something that, of course, is going to likely mirror your resume to a large degree. It's not something that can necessarily get you a job. It certainly can undermine your chances for a job. So you definitely want to have your LinkedIn profile up to date and consistent with your resume. And as far as pictures go, you want to go for a plain background, good lighting, business casual dress, and a genuine smile. So the do not do is shown in the resume there, with a woodsy background and outdoor gear, and some really good examples shown in the bottom right. You can see the nice lighting, genuine smile, clean background, business casual dress, and these folks at Three Circle Studios, if you happen to want to do this professionally and you're in the Boston area, they do some great work. Okay, so we're going to talk about how the screener reacts to your resume and some of the aspects of their thinking that you want to be aware of and perhaps take advantage of the knowledge. So the human brain is hardwired for snap judgments. You hear a lion, you jump. It might be tame, might be behind the bars in a zoo, but you're going to jump because your brain is wired that way. So let's take a couple of other examples. If I said the word broccoli, some of you are going to think crunchy, some of you are going to think mushy. And remember, we had almost a 50-year span of class years, and this is likely going to correlate with age. What if I said scorpion? Some of you are going to think scary, and some are going to think tasty. And this one is a cultural effect. Resume readers can't help themselves from forming unconscious opinions. We all do it. It's just the nature of being human. But this tendency to form opinions quickly impacts how your resume is going to be perceived. And let me explain how. A typo on your resume, you may think of as, well, I've got this whole page-long document and there's one little mistake. Who cares? It plants a seed. It tells the recruiter or the manager, maybe this person doesn't pay attention to detail. So go over it again, have someone else go over it, fix all the punctuation, make sure nothing's misspelled, and so forth. You really need to pay attention to that level of detail. Ageism is a thing. And if you're of a certain age, you might want to consider removing your graduation date from the education section of your resume and consider removing work experience prior to about 2005. It's unfortunate, but it can have an impact. Likewise, if your given name is ethnically distinctive, consider using your initials. There's some really interesting research from the National Bureau of Economic Research there with professors from Chicago's Booth School of Business and MIT, explaining the background of that advice, pardon me, which I'd encourage you to take a look at. And this is not about trying to, let's say, get into a company that is actively, consciously discriminatory. This is about unconscious biases that have been demonstrated that people have. So you even somebody who would never deliberately be discriminatory, they can sometimes behave that way. And the paper goes into detail, but use of initials can help minimize that effect.
I'll jump in with a question before we go on to the next part of the resume journey, but it was really interesting to see the piece of advice that you just gave a couple of seconds ago about job experience prior to 2005 and perhaps leaving that off the resume so that way you don't quite date yourself, and then leaving off the graduation years. If they're, say, for somebody like me in the mid-90s, I probably will want to do that. At the same time, it made me think, does that look sort of dishonest, or does that get taken a certain way if I omit that? Because I'm trying to present as younger than I actually am. And so does the interview then become the space to then say, well, I have this experience prior to 2005, so it was not on the resume. There could be a little bit of awkwardness there, and maybe runs counter to some of the things that we may have been programmed to hear, about writing resumes.
Sure. Well, we'll talk about it in a little more detail later. There is no rule that says that your resume must include every accomplishment that you've ever had in your entire life. So, omitting things is just part of the editing process. So I've seen a number of resumes where people are, looking for some feedback and help on them. And these are folks, mid to late career, looking for something different or something new. And they inevitably are very, and rightfully so, proud of all the work they've done and accomplishments over the years. And they'll start with 35 years experience in such and such a field. And it's a judgment call. In my opinion, the impact of that is worse than the other way. So, I would say, I wouldn't lead with 35 years experience for two reasons. One, as I said before, there is a prejudice in the culture against older folks. And also those early level screeners, what they're going to see is this person's going to be expensive. So I think, if you're really genuinely interested in the company, you're genuinely interested in the role, you think you're qualified and could really add value, you got to get a foot in the door. And so I don't think there's any awkwardness to just simply not talk about some of that older stuff, because, it's dated. Much of it is likely not that relevant anymore anyway. And once you get to the conversation with the hiring manager, if you're a good fit, you're a good fit, and that other stuff kind of washes away. So, yeah, I think it's perfectly okay to edit in that way, and maximize your chances of getting to the interview and really showing them how you can contribute. In the end, they want to hire the people that can contribute the most, and your experience allows you to do that. But it can also create this cultural hurdle getting in the door. So this is the workaround.
Interesting thoughts around that, as far as get in the door and we'll take our chances from there. It's better than, getting rejected and not having an opportunity, and then the job search for that particular position is dead at that point. I'll go to another viewer question, and this may be very specific to the person and difficult to answer, but I figured I'd ask it anyway, and you could be the judge of that. The question is, how can I get to the interview stage of a job application process? I've been applying to jobs nearly every day since the summer of 2024, and I've only gotten one interview. Thanks for your help. I can just feel the frustration in that.
Sure. Yeah, and I mentor a lot of students, and they often are faced with that same experience. And the answer is networking. applying cold to a job you might have, a posting you might have found on LinkedIn or some other platform is going to result in that frustration. Some of those jobs are just posted because the company has to post it for legal compliance reasons, but they already have an internal candidate picked out and they're just going through the motions. Even if they are really searching, they get hundreds and thousands of applicants. The job market's pretty tough right now, so they're getting inundated. So that's going to be a difficult process, and you're not alone with that frustration. So what you do about that is you have to go build a network and leverage the network you already have. And that means figuring out where the people in the industry that you want to get into are spending time. And maybe that's a conference, maybe that's an active LinkedIn group. But get involved in conversations in those spaces and build genuine relationships. And we don't have time to get into it here. It could be a subject for another talk altogether. The key thing with networking is it's kind of counterintuitive. If you go into networking with the idea of, I need to make this transaction and get this person to take my resume and bring it to their boss, it will definitely not work. So you have to build the network with no expectations in mind. You're just networking to make friends. And you're going to be trying to make friends in the field that you want to work in, but it can never be transactional. It has to be genuine relationship building. And once you've got a genuine connection with somebody, it will certainly come up. What are you up to? What's your job? Well, actually, I'm really interested in your company, and you can bring it up, but you have to be given permission first. If you lead with, here's my resume, please take it, it's not going to work out. So we can talk more in the Q&A if there's time, but yeah, networking is the answer, but there's some tricks to doing it effectively. But in the end, I guess one other comment, it's a numbers game. You do want to apply, cast a wide net and apply a lot of places because the percentages are fairly low. And so another way to reduce the frustration is to think through, this roadmap of the layers that your resume is going to go through, and make some guesstimates about what percent of candidates are going to be eliminated at each phase. And then you can work backward and make a plan and say, okay, if I want to have 2 good offers, and I think only 10% of the people are going to get through the hiring manager, and only 30% are going to get through the HR, and only 50% are going to get through the AI, you can do the math and say, well, that means that to get 2 offers, I need to apply to 1,000 jobs, or whatever the numbers come out to. And that can be a little bit daunting, but it's empowering, because then you can make a plan and you can say, okay, I expect to have to apply to 900 places. That means 3 a day for a year, or however you want to arrange your plan. And now you're in control. You're working to a plan. So networking and mapping out a plan, I would say, are the best strategies.
Like they always say, network before you need it, because
Yeah.
by the time that you get started, if you're in the middle of a job search, it's probably a little bit too late. And I like the thing about the numbers game. And I feel like what you just shared really changes the energy around the process in a way where, instead of just sending things in a way that just kind of not really thinking about it, being much more strategic about the process. And like you said, it's empowering. It makes you feel like this is something that you can manage, versus it's very reactive. I'm going to send and just, fingers crossed, hope like anything that I get something that comes back.
Right.
I'll bring in one more question, then we'll roll on with the slide deck, but I thought this would fit in here pretty well. Some of it may have been answered through some of what was in the earlier parts of the talk, but I'll throw this out anyway. Question is, I have multiple career changes and would like to highlight that experience as essential in the newest career. How do I mention my work history and skills within one page? And probably, I think part of that is, depending how long they've been out, going with that 05 or sooner rule, or earlier, taking that stuff out.
Yeah, so I think it's, that one may require some, a little more one-on-one time to understand fully. I think you have to remember that the resume is not so much for you as it is for the folks at the company that are looking at it. And so thinking about what they care about first is probably the first piece of advice that I would offer. As proud as you might be of your accomplishments in various fields in the past, it's only the ones that are relevant to the job you're applying to that need to be there. The other ones wind up being distractions. But there's probably a lot more to that story, so I wouldn't want to speculate further than that. Okay, so continuing the resumes journey, we've made it through the AI, we've made it through the HR recruiter, and we're moving on to the hiring manager. So what's the hiring manager looking for? Well, as a general rule, this table or this bar graph comes from NACE, which is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And they show, they poll every year a huge number of companies and universities and publish the results. And this is their 2025 Job Outlook survey. And you can see the kinds of skills that people are interested in: problem solving, ability to work in a team, communication, initiative, et cetera. And I just wanted to highlight that many people are focused on their technical skills and their computer skills. And when I say technical, that doesn't necessarily mean technical because you're an engineer. It could be technical in your field. So that might be the details of finance or the details of newspaper editing, or the skill, the job specific skills, and computer skills. And you can see that those technical skills aren't cracking the top 5, and computer skills aren't cracking the top 10. So just something to bear in mind in the background. The things that you may believe are important to employers may not necessarily be prioritized in the same way by the person looking at your resume. So NACE has a lot of good resources about that. So how do you pass the hiring manager screening? Well, this is the first time that someone who deeply understands what you do is looking at your resume. What do they want to see? Well, again, like the HR screener, they want to see something well organized because it gives them a clue about your overall communication skills. And you saw that communication was in the top 3 of what employers are looking for. They also want to see it action-oriented. And you may have heard this advice before, that you want to start with an action word for each bullet point. And many people know that, many people do that, but they still manage to undermine the maximum impact that they could have. Because I see people describing what they were responsible for rather than what they accomplished. So the distinction is, you want to describe what you did, not what you were responsible for. So words like led, developed, managed are good. Words like attended, reported, in charge of are less impactful. And you want to emphasize the active, not the passive. So I have this little table here. If you supported something, that's okay, but not as good as if you developed it. If you undertook something, that's okay, but not as good as if you delivered it, and so on. So you want to be looking for action words that are more active than passive type actions, and that they focus on what you did and what you delivered, not just a list of responsibilities. And that's something I want to emphasize, that because I see people make that mistake all the time. The currency of business is results. So again, hiring managers care about business impact. And when I say results, in particular, quantified results. Reduced project completion time by 18%. Business results, $157,000 annual savings as a result of the project that I finished. Okay, so managers care about impact. A list of responsibilities doesn't get you there. So the way I think about this is, if a hiring manager could get to the end of one of your bullet points and think, okay, but what did they contribute? And then what happened? Or Well, so what was the impact of that? You've got more work to do to clarify that bullet.
I promised myself I was going to go longer without interrupting, but what you just said tied into a question that came in from the pre-registrant, so I had to throw it in. For the first time in my career, I have a staff. How do I talk about the work my staff does as opposed to me doing it personally on my resume?
Great question. And yeah, I remember facing that same thing in my career. It can be quite an uncomfortable feeling. But yeah, your resume is about you, and it's about, if you're leading a team, the impact that your team is having is impact that you're having. And so you have to own it. Now, you don't want to be misleading about it. You don't want to be disingenuous about it. You can talk about what the team accomplished, but if it's on your watch, you own it. Okay. Yeah. So a couple of examples. Just going to talk about to highlight two of these here. So again, this notion of action-oriented and quantified. So if we look on the left here at the one in the yellow box, worked on projects to automate manufacture of consumable plastic cartridges versus developed 3 consumable cartridge designs, which launched on time and saved 32% compared to the prior generation. And by the way, all of these examples come from, they may be adjusted for anonymity, but they come from resumes that I've helped optimize. And you can see the difference there. It went from worked on to developed. Both action words. Worked on is a little bit passive. It's more about responsibility. Developed is more active and more about impact. And then you can see some numbers that quantify the impact. And then if we look down here, oversee direct reports in data mining and analysis, report creation, quality control, client communication, and time management. It's a list of responsibilities. And it's a list of responsibilities that most any director in most any business could point to and claim. Versus led a team of 6 analysts managing 22 client campaigns, generating $7.5 million of revenue, increasing 8% year over year. So same information, much more impact on the right. So that's the kind of phrasing that you want to be going for. Okay, at this point, we've covered the basic resume features to minimize your chances of being eliminated from consideration. So how to get through the AI screening, how to get through the HR screening, how to make the minimum cut with the hiring manager. Next, we're going to talk about how to maximize your chances of getting the interview and acing the interview. So any questions at this point before we dive into the back half of the talk?
I'd say let's go ahead and proceed, and I will bring in some new questions when ready. I have some others, but they don't really seem to fit. So
Okay.
I'd rather just have us keep going.
Okay, so next thing is differentiation. So your resume is with the hiring manager, and they're going to be asking themselves, why should they want to hire you over the dozens of other candidates with similar credentials? So selling yourself means distinguishing yourself from the crowd. In order to be ready to do this with your resume, you're going to have to determine the top few specific reasons why the company should choose you over the other applicants. And that means answering the questions about how you would specifically contribute to the company's success, what makes you unique and distinct from all the other candidates, and having that apparent on your resume with some supporting evidence in the form of those quantified results that we were just talking about. You don't want to waste precious space on your resume with things that everyone else could claim and credibly claim. And I just mentioned that before. Well, let's take it from a student's point of view first, and then we'll get back to the point I just mentioned. If you're going to list courses, and I see students do this all the time, listing out courses on their resume, if you have a couple of specialized courses that are directly applicable to the job you're applying for, go for it. By all means, put them on your resume. But if you're just listing out the core curriculum for your major, that is the same list that everyone from every university in the country could list out, you're just wasting space. You're not adding value. You're not making an impression. You're not differentiating yourself in the eyes of the hiring manager. And likewise, with experience resumes, job activities, impactful action words, quantified results like streamlined monthly reporting, saving 21 person hours per month. That's pretty good. Versus delivered monthly status reports. Everyone in a management role can claim to be delivering monthly status reports. Doesn't make you stand out, doesn't tie to results, doesn't leave the impression that you are going to deliver such results for your future employer. So a couple of examples here. On the top of the page, let's say the job was creating brochures, conference materials, and reports for a financial company. And the other applicants are going to be folks with finance industry experience, maybe some graphics experience. But you have worked as a graphic designer in advertising, and you studied finance as an undergrad. You've got the perfect storm of skills. You want to make sure that comes across loud and clear, and there's supporting evidence of the kinds of results you've delivered in those areas on your resume. If we take the second example, the job developing and designing sensors for automotive applications. The competition is going to be mechanical engineers, it's going to be electrical engineers, it's going to be people with automotive experience. Your unique story, you studied both mechanical engineering and physics, and you worked in aerospace, which is a somewhat related industry, applying sensors in product development. You want to make sure that comes across loud and clear, that your hiring manager who's reviewing your resume is connecting the dots about how you are uniquely qualified for this role compared to the run-of-the-mill candidates that are coming through. Okay, another way to differentiate yourself is with an objective statement. And I see a lot of people not using this, but I think it's particularly helpful. So this would be a statement at the top of your resume that briefly summarizes what you're all about, what you're looking for in a role, and your unique value proposition. This summary of what makes you especially qualified compared to the other applicants. So this will be 1 or 2 sentences explaining the job you want and especially how you could contribute. This is very important. I mentioned it before. I'm going to emphasize it again here. The resume is not for you. It's for the hiring manager. So they don't care about things that you've done that aren't relevant to contributing to the job at hand. So the statement should indicate the role that you're looking for, but it should be phrased to highlight how your skills would benefit the company. So I mentioned here, the job you want, it's not really about what you want, it's about how you could help the company. So if you want to be framing your resume sort of company first from their perspective, you're much more likely to get noticed that way. By the way, that applies equally in networking. If you approach someone, on a LinkedIn group, and say, I would really love to talk to you. Well, they're getting a random message from a stranger. They don't care what you would love. They're interested in their own life. So if you reframe that and reach out to them and say, this project you did in 2015 on whatever the topic is really interesting. Would you have 10 minutes to tell me about it? Now you're making it about them. You're giving them a chance to brag. They're much more likely to respond. So both in networking and in resume, you want to be looking at it to optimize around the other person's point of view, not around your own history. It should be tailored, the objective statement and the resume overall as well, to each role that you're applying for. So you might have to juggle several different variants or versions of your resume if you're applying to different kinds of roles. And the objective statement, for those of you who are changing fields where your experience may not align in an obvious way with the job you're applying for, the objective statement can be the bridge that can help you explain how your experience in one area is relevant to the job at hand. And so some examples here, self-motivated graphic designer with strong skills in Photoshop, et cetera, seeking an opportunity for a challenging entry-level role. Or highly motivated, financially savvy chemical engineer seeks consulting role in semiconductor. So you're capturing a little bit about, bragging about yourself, the kind of role you're looking for, the industry you're looking for. And to the extent you make it as much as possible about what the company's benefit is going to be, you're going to be better off. Okay, so you've now differentiated yourself in the eyes of the hiring manager. You've been invited to an interview. Your resume's work is not done yet. It has this one more very important job. And to me, this is the most interesting element. And most people do not realize this. Your resume is your lever to guide the interview itself. So you have a direct influence over how the interview is going to go on the basis of what you've put in your resume. Let me explain. Most interviewers are going to formulate their questions based on the contents of your resume. Therefore, you want to be highlighting projects and experiences where you're going to light up with energy and enthusiasm when they ask about them. And you'll be able and prepared to tell a concise, interesting, and relevant story about those projects. It came up in an answer to a question earlier. There's no rule that your resume must be a comprehensive catalog of everything you've ever done in your life. You can tailor your content to focus on what you want them to ask you about. This means that class you got a D in, you don't have to list it. That job that you hated with the toxic environment that where your boss inhibited your progress and your development, you might need to mention it for continuity, but you certainly don't have to emphasize it. You don't have to elaborate on it. And that work in the box office at the movie theater in high school, if you're a student and you had a couple of summer jobs, by all means put them on there. Whether if you're in the box office, if you're a waiter, as a student, I would absolutely keep those in because it shows your responsibility, able to deal with people. You can show up on time. You can overcome various obstacles. So those are absolutely relevant if you're just starting out. But if you're 15 years into a career in a certain specialty, a generic job you had in high school, that's just taking up space on your resume that you can use for more impactful items. So I just to wrap up, I gave a talk at the Fleischman Career Center, Binghamton, a virtual talk like this about navigating the technical interview. It's grayed out because there's not a recording of it. I just wanted to mention that if you have questions about interviewing, that's something that I'm happy to chat about as well. Steve mentioned at the beginning that I gave a talk a couple of years ago about taking control of your time. And that is available on the Binghamton Alumni Learning Network. So if you scroll back a couple of years, you will find that talk recorded in there. And if that's of interest, as I mentioned at the beginning, my company does professional skills mentoring, coaching, and development. So I'm always happy to talk about that stuff with folks as well. And if you need help with your resume or interview preparation, by all means, reach out to me. Here's my email and LinkedIn. I am happy to talk about this stuff anytime. And just to remind everybody the journey that we've just been on. Here are the various hurdles that the resume gets through, and time for questions.
Yes, it is time for questions. And why don't we go back just a little, if you are okay with doing this, to the slide with your contact information. So we'll just kind of leave that up for a couple seconds longer before I take this down, just in case anybody didn't get this earlier. And also a little bit of housekeeping, because Andy had referenced the webinar that he had done with us a couple of years ago. I'll pull this up. So this is the website address to get to our storehouse of webinars. If you click on past events, it'll take you to the entire archive. So scroll down a bit, because it was a couple of years ago. So you'll do a little bit of searching to find this, but I assure you it's there. You'll find his webinar on the Learning Network website. And then also there's a question that came in from somebody that had a little bit of trouble. They had to jump off the webinar, go to a call, and sadly missed some of the content. And they were really quite upset that happened. But we record these, and these get automatically archived. So immediately after we sign off here, just a little bit after 1 o'clock, if you go to the past events section of the website, the first thing you're going to see right at the top of the page there is going to be today's webinar. So if there's anything that you want to go back and take a look at or take a listen to that you missed, go ahead and check it out. We'll keep it up there forever and ever. Share it around. Help the good content get around. The more people seeing this, the better. All of us know someone. In fact, I did a share while I was off camera a couple of minutes ago to someone else that I thought might benefit from watching this either in real time or just going back tonight to go ahead and take a look at it. So it is there. It is meant to be a resource for you, our alumni, but also for the general public. And we're not super duper protective of it. If we put it out there for you to have it, anyone can have it. And the more people we help, the better. And as I always say, if we helped even one person, it was worth it to get out of bed, drive down here and do the program. And I think Andy kind of feels the same way, although we hope that we help more than one person. And so he said we started with about 90 that registered. That's a good number. So we'll take it. I'm going to go ahead and ask a question. Going back to the list of questions from the pre-registrants, there were a couple of things, and I think you hit that earlier, about the objective statement or the summary and the necessity of it, because people really asking if they really should do that. And so certainly I think very mixed opinions about it. It's not anything we look forward to writing. We'd rather just focus on the resume. And so someone had asked a question about a cover letter. Should you write a cover letter? If it asks for one, probably should do it. Does anyone like writing cover letters? Of course not. We all hate it, but it's a necessary evil of it. And maybe throw it into ChatGPT and see what it comes up with if you really are into that sort of thing. But I'll go to one question that I think maybe wasn't quite touched on earlier. Some of these are so specific. So that's why we have Andy's contact information on here, because we present this in general broad brushes, but things can be very, very specific to somebody's situation, like the field that they're in, maybe how long they've been out in the job search, things like that, how long it's been since graduating, a lot of very specific things. It's hard to know, like the question about how come I'm not getting an interview and I've sent out 1 million resumes since last summer is a tough thing to answer if we don't know you and your situation specifically. So hopefully we've given you something that's generally good enough to go with, but is a tough question for us to answer. So I just bring that up so both sides get considered. So after all of that, the question is, how to switch fields mid-career. I've worked in social reform and now trying to get into a different space such as Google. Those are two very, very different things.
Yeah, it's difficult to do that. And the key is drawing the lines to connect the dots for the employer. So you know what you've done. You understand the skills that you learned along the way and how they apply in the new field. But other people are not going to be able to connect the dots. You're going to have to spell it out for them. It's analogous to giving a PowerPoint presentation. I see this all the time with young professionals who work on a project, and then they have to present it to the director. And they go about it in chronological order, and they talk about all the different things they tried and what didn't work, and they're kind of meandering all over the place until they eventually come to the relevant punchline at the end. And what I always tell them is, this is the way jokes are constructed. You set an expectation, and then with the punchline, you subvert the expectation and flip things on their head, and that's what people find funny. And you don't want people to find your business presentations funny. So you need to give them the punchline up front, because what that does is it provides them a mental roadmap. So as you provide bits of information, they know where to file it. And then when they get to the end, they've taken the same journey that you were trying to lead them on. If you just start throwing out details, they're constructing their own narrative with your information. And then when you get to the conclusion, they may be in a different place, and then you wind up dealing with lots and lots of questions. And I think that's analogous to this situation with a resume that you're trying to craft to go into a different field. It's not going to be enough to say what you accomplished in the prior field. You're going to have to explain how that's relevant to the new field, what skill you learned, and how that's going to apply directly to the new job. So as Steve said, a tough question to answer generically, but I think that's the for me, that's the thought process is okay, I've had accomplishments over here. How do I help the hiring manager to relate them over here? And of course, you then have an even higher hurdle in terms of keywords to get to the hiring manager in the first place. So there again, networking is going to be really important. Maybe taking some classes in the new field, even if you already know the material. Getting the certificate gives you a level of credibility that otherwise you'd have to be waving your hands trying to explain.
We're a little bit past 1 o'clock, so we'll take 2 or 3 more questions, give or take, depending on how long some of these answers are. And I won't put my email address back up on the screen, because then we'll get more questions and we can handle the remaining time, and it's not really fair to anyone. But as we said before, we had Andy's contact information on the screen. If you go back and look at the recording online, you'll be able to grab it there as well. So definitely take advantage of that. And it's always something that's very important to him, is to help people in the Binghamton circle. So definitely take advantage of that. Here's a question that just came in from a viewer, and it's a great question. Actually, all of these are, but here it is. What is the best way to account for a larger gap in work continuity on a resume due to things like illness or raising children?
I think you just state it. I don't know that there's you're always going to encounter people who see a gap and believe something nefarious was going on. But we're all human beings, and a gap for raising a family is a perfectly legitimate thing. And I think you can just state it. I don't think there's going to be a way to sort of gloss over it or otherwise sort of camouflage it. So I think you can just tell it like it is. To the extent that it might have been possible to take a class, do some volunteering, whatever you might have done in addition, if you can take credit for that on a resume, that's great. But these things are pretty demanding, obviously, and take up a lot of time. So I don't think there's really a neat way to summarize it and make it, go away from the resume. I think you just tell it like it is.
I would think a common enough situation in 2025, and so it's new to us, is the kind of thing that we feel like it's a big deal, but somebody in the recruiter hiring manager position is seeing this pretty much all the time.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's take at least one more, and I don't want to go past 10 after the hour, and I know you have a busy day, and in fact, we all do, and at some point the audience shrinks and shrinks, but this question I thought would be worth tackling. So here it is. I happen to jump from a bunch of minimum wage positions and also a lot of terminations after graduating. I do admit I have my own shortcomings. While I do have a bit of traumatic experiences from my childhood past and whatnot, and to professionalize myself on top of that fundamental, especially with mental health related history, is nothing but a challenge. So what kind of help should I seek out, especially if I have trouble with cluttering and hoarding a bunch of information and missing important deadlines at the moment? So kind of a lot there, but I think you can pluck out the most important pieces.
Yeah, I think, that's obviously that's would require some deeper conversation. Yeah, I think. Well, I think the person kind of in a certain way answered part of their own question at the end there. Cluttering and hoarding information, that's definitely not what you want on a resume. So, you need to, maybe it's start with an AI resource. Work with a friend or a coach to kind of unpack that detail and and really kind of hew back to the principles that I was talking about earlier of aligning with what the hiring manager is going to be interested in. What you learned from a particular job that you had in the past and how it relates to the job you're applying for. If you can take an online course that aligns with the job in order to not only build the skills but get that extra level of credibility from a certificate. It's the certainly there are going to be people out there where if they see a string of jobs short term, they're going to jump to a certain conclusion about that. So to the extent you can smooth that over without being dishonest about it, that's probably a beneficial thing to try to do. But yeah, I would say clarity of organization on the resume is generally perceived as clarity of thought and clarity of communication. Those are good things in every kind of job. So I would start there with that last part of the comment about a lot of information and kind of disorganized. That would be the place to start tackling.
And it sounds like just in this particular instance that it could be a situation where a career coach might be of help because there's some very, very specific issues that are needing to be unpacked there that I think are affecting this person's impact or chances of success. Where it's hard for us in the broader brush without really getting to know somebody to really handle all of that. A one-on-one coaching type of setting, I think, would be something where they feel they're getting the support. Somebody is able to kind of see into the psychology of a lot of that and advise them properly. So maybe that's just you're the expert. That's my unofficial take, is that I think maybe that's where it would benefit, because I have done that and I didn't have nearly as much to deal with, but it allowed us to get into some very specific things that in a program of this type would have been nearly impossible to do.
Yeah.
Well, Andy, thank you so much. We're right about 10 after, and as I promised, we weren't going to extend past that because I don't want to keep you. It's I know you have a ton going on, and it was a challenge to fit us in to get to do this, but you have so much passion for Binghamton. You mentioned doing a talk with the Fleischman Center in addition to doing a previous webinar with us. And when we put the call out for speakers a couple of months back, you were very, very quick to answer and said, I had a great experience the first time, really want to do it again because I love helping people from Binghamton. So Andy, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being with us here today.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, my pleasure.
And that will wrap it up for us here in 2025. And so our webinar is planned for 2026. We're already going as far as getting these things onto the calendar. So Wednesday, January 28th, we'll have a program on women and wealth. The following Wednesday, we're going to have a webinar on relationships. And then March 18th, we're going to have a webinar on AI and intellectual property. And we're going to plow through ahead to get things planned out in 2026. Something coming up in 2026, and talking about careers as we did here today. Binghamton Success Week is a program that we offer. It has 3 days of worth of programming, usually in April. And so we're working on the dates for this year's upcoming programs. There are 2 webinars that are career focused, usually around things like changing careers or resumes, things like that. Very, very common topics that people want. And sandwiched in between the 2 resumes or the 2 webinars that we have, the 2 online programs, is an in-person event in New York City. So we'll have a webinar usually on a Tuesday. The Wednesday would be an in-person event in New York City, and the Thursday would be another webinar. That's been the typical template. We may change it up a little bit, but the schedule is being worked on. And when that's released, we'll be in touch with people by email, and we'll go ahead and put the information on our events calendar. So once again, if you want to connect with us, we want to connect with you at binghamton.edu/ advancement/connect, or binghamton.edu/alumni if you want to do a little bit less typing, but this isn't really a lot. I think you can get this pretty easily. binghamton.edu/advancement/connect, lifelong learning offerings, volunteer opportunities at the university, events live and virtual, all sorts of ways you can be involved with us here at your alma mater, Binghamton University. So for Andy Willner, I'm Steve Seebersaw. Have a great rest of the day, a great rest of 2025, and we'll see you again into the new year.